Australia is a country of citizens. Pakistan and Australia have good relations built around commonality of interest. Australia has long been a preferred destination of Pakistani students for higher education and people education, cultural exchange programs. Years around the world, I recently came back from Australia. Canada. That's all I did. So. Okay. His Excellency has chosen to speak on a topic of great interest, Australia's physical location and relation with Pakistan. The topic, as itself indicates, is going to be very interesting when he speaks with us. Apart from relations with Pakistan, the High Commissioner is expected to share his perspective on Australia's role in world and Asia Pacific in particular. Of particular interest would be to hear him on Australia's evolving role in regional alliances like Quad and AUKUS. It is also keen to strengthen research partnership with Australian think tanks and universities. Our MOU with Deakin University for writing a book jointly is a step in the same direction, and we look forward to the High Commissioner of Australia to connect us with more think tanks for research collaboration, and we will request your help and guidance in this process. With these few words, I hand you all over back to the embassy. Thank you. I would now be honored to introduce today's distinguished lecturer, Mr. Neil Hawkins, High Commissioner of Australia to Pakistan.
Mr. Hawkins took up his position in Pakistan on 27 June 2022. He has previously served as Australia's ambassador to the Arab Republic of Egypt, covering Sudan and Eritrea, Saudi Arabia, along with Bahrain, Oman, and Yemen. Prior to his appointment to Pakistan, he was Assistant Secretary in the East Asia Division in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. He has also served in the United Nations peacekeeping operations in the Gaza Strip and West Bank and has much more to his credit. Sir, you may address the audience.
I just might need some help with the technology, so with the overheads. Okay, it works, all right? Okay, that slide, fine. Good, so this is forward? Okay, good, okay, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, thank you for coming. Distinguished guests, friends, and emerging and future excellencies and distinguished guests in the back, because I'm sure you will be emerging and your own excellencies in your own right, inshallah, in the future. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much for having me here. And I'd like to thank Dr. Reza for the invite to come and speak to you all. So you might be surprised to know that Pakistan actually has, Australia has quite a long history with Pakistan. And that point starts in Durrani Sab's home province of Balochistan many years ago. So Balochistan, when Australia was developing in the 1800s, we didn't have railways. And so in order to transport goods between our towns and cities through the deserts, we relied on camels. And the people who look after the camels, the cameleers, many of them came from Balochistan. And you can see the camels being loaded onto the boats and then brought to Australia. And in that picture on the right there is actually one of the first mosques that was built in Australia by Baloch cameleers. And there's a replica now of that made in Australia. So Baloch and Pakistan, before predates Pakistan, of course, played an important part in our history and our development. Baloch also built the first mosque in Australia in 1884. And now Australia is home to about 800,000 Muslims. We have 2 Muslims in our cabinet. And when they are in parliament, they take their oath on the Holy Quran. And Pakistan specific, we have about 100,000 Australian Pakistanis who are a vibrant and growing community. Now, we also had an impact here in Pakistan. So as you can see from this mosque in Lahore, you can see it says Jama Masjid al-Australia. This was established by a camel trader who came back from Australia, from the Baksh family, and decided to establish a mosque in Lahore. It's near the railway station, if anyone is there. And his family, the Baksh family, still live in Perth to this day. And multiculturalism, as a result, is really critical for our society. So this picture here reflects our multicultural society, and this is an imam in our Navy. So in all our forces we have imams for Muslim troops. And we also the government funds 82 Muslim schools across Australia. So if you're a Muslim and you want to send your kids to a Muslim school, you can do so, and it is funded, or at least partly funded, by the Australian government. Now, going back to, again, Durrani Saab's hometown, this guy is Sir Thomas Blamey, and he is our only field marshal in Australia, but he attended Quetta, Staff Command College, many years ago. And the first Australian to attend Quetta Staff Command College was in 1909, so many, many years ago, and we still have attending Quetta Staff College an Australian since that, and we have someone there today. So that really shows that long, long history, and the cooperation between our countries has deepened and developed since then. And so we've had our Chief of Defence Force visit 3 times, most recently this year. Our Chief of Army is due soon, and the Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mirza, visited Australia last year. And training. So there are about 30 Pakistani officers who are trained in Australia every year. And this picture on the left is of Muhammad Talha. He won the Sword of Honor of an international trainee, very impressive. And on the right, one of the 2 of the 18,000 or so Australian, Pakistani students in Australia who study there every year. And we also sponsor around 16 postgraduate students and their families to come to Australia to study, and around 50 on short courses. So education and capacity building is really important. Anyway, today I will speak for about 30 minutes and then have questions. I'll talk firstly on 4 topics. The first one is about information about Australian identity. Who are Australians? I'll try and give you an idea. The second is common challenges that both Pakistan and Australia face. And of course, that'll revolve much around climate change. The third area is our strategic environment, as it says in the title, in the Indo-Pacific. And I'll finish off with an unusual bit of history that not many of you may know. So, you can't see this very clearly, but this is Australia overlaid on Pakistan and the Middle East. And if you can see, you know, the top end is near Kazakhstan. We go all the way down to, I just need to be able to see this because I can't see so well. So you can see here is Pakistan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Israel, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt. So this is Australia, just so you get an idea of the size of Australia if we put it over this region. So you can see we're a very large country, but in fact we're the 6th largest country in the world and a continent. Our population is about the population of Karachi, about 27 million. So we don't have that many people in such a big country, but we have a large immigrant population. So as of now, 50% of Australians, half of all Australians, were either born overseas or one of their parents was born overseas. So any of you now, I could take you and put you in Australia as you are dressed, and everyone will think you're Australian. It's very, very multicultural. And this is one of the beauties about the country and something we're very proud about. And one other commonality between Australia and Pakistan is that we are 2 relatively young nations, but with ancient civilizations. And we have, of course, our long indigenous Aboriginal history as well. So that's where we sit in the Indo-Pacific. We're surrounded by 3 oceans, the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and the Southern Ocean. And so for us, because we're the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, we talk a lot about the Indo-Pacific. because of those two oceans dominate our history. And traditionally, for many years and continuingly, our modern history has depended on trade, and that trade has depended on the sea. So having open sea trade routes has been critical to our survival and underpins our foreign and defense policy. So that is something that we're always looking at, our ability to trade with other people, because we rely on it so much. Now, we've had sort of three stages in our history, which are quite interesting. The first, of course, like Pakistan, we were a British colony, and we relied on Britain both for our security and our trade. And then after the World War II, we then relied on the US for our security and for our trade. But in the 90s and in the 80s, 1980s and 1990s, that changed. China became our largest trading partner, and the US remained our security partner. And of course, we need to now balance those. So China's economic growth has really supported Australian prosperity and has helped lift millions of Chinese out of poverty and develop that country as well. And I'll come back to our relations with China a bit later. So I'll talk a little bit about the Australian identity. And this involves a little bit of history, but quite an interesting bit, frankly. So every year, I host an annual commemoration called Anzac Day. And Anzac, A-N-Z-A-C, stands for Australia New Zealand Army Corps. And it's one of the most solemn events in our calendar. And Anzac recalls a particular campaign in World War I that was launched at Gallipoli. Oh, shukriya. Thank you very much. Yeah, fantastic. It was launched in Gallipoli, or in Turkey, they call it Çanakkale, in 1915. So, on that day, Anzac troops were part of a larger force made up of British, French, and Canadian soldiers and troops from the Indian subcontinent. And we landed in Turkey to try and take some land there. But it was met by fierce resistance by Turkish forces, including the forces who actually were commanded by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, who then, of course, later became the president and established the Republic of Turkey. And at the end of 1915, Anzac forces were evacuated. We did not succeed. The casualties on all sides were very high. We had 8,700 Australians killed, including and another 1,300 killed from the Indian subcontinent. And Turkey lost 88,000 troops. It was a very tough battle. Not many countries focus on what was for us a military defeat. But for Australia, that defeat, that Gallipoli campaign, contributed to an emerging sense of national identity as we were extricating ourselves from the British colonial identity. So Gallipoli is a defining moment in our history. But more than that, Gallipoli has been referred to as the gentleman's war. The mutual respect that emerged between the Anzac and Australian New Zealand troops and Turkish forces has developed now into strong bonds of friendship and goodwill between Australia and Turkey. So the events that followed Gallipoli demonstrated, I think, the ability of peoples and countries who have fought a war to find the courage and will to overcome the past hostilities and reconcile. And this is the message that the possibility of reconciliation between former enemies is as important today as it was then, and of course we see it across the world now. So I'd like to shift to the common challenge, the second part, on climate change facing Australia and Pakistan. So these are some pictures from Australia during recent disasters. And what you notice in these is that it involves the military all the time. So that climate change is a major threat in many ways, but it also is becoming a national security challenge to many countries, including to Pakistan and Australia, because governments rely on the military to respond to climate emergencies. So in Australia, our defense forces had to respond to huge bushfires, floods, and even COVID by visiting old people's homes. So this is a big distraction. And here in Pakistan, we recognize the military's important role in swiftly and effectively responding to the 2022 floods. And the military is expected by government here as well to take on a bigger role in this. But for all armies, and this is a major distraction from the military's core duties, and using military as a comes at a cost of forced preparedness and combat effectiveness. So Australia, we now approach climate change as a security challenge. So in Australia, and I mentioned this to my colleagues in Rawalpindi in the military, our Minister of Climate Change now sits and is a full member of Australia's National Security Committee of Cabinet because it is such a security matter. But I don't want to just focus on the military. In Pakistan, on the civilian side, we're working very closely with Pakistan in practical ways to look at the impact of climate change and sharing our experience in water and agriculture. And water is likely to become, or is already becoming, a problem for both our countries. So this is a picture of a guy called Ed Barrett Leonard on the left, and you will see him. He's one of the scientists who works with Pakistani farmers. And this year, we celebrate 40 years of Australian researchers working with Pakistani farmers and researchers across Pakistan. So this 40 years, this was taken when the first visit happened in 1984 by Ed. And this has helped us provide some of our expertise to Pakistani colleagues to help adapt to climate change. I'm just going to mention three things that I think is really important because these researchers tell us emerging problems for Pakistan: quality and quantity of water. So the water table in Sindh and Punjab is falling about 1 meter every year because of the amount of water that is being extracted. And of course, there are, I think, some solar tube wells being distributed. There is no requirement to get permission to build wells, so that rate is likely to increase. So there's no control over building wells or the extraction of water, which is one problem, they tell me. The second is the quality of water. So in Lahore, I don't know, 12 million people in Lahore, I suppose it depends where you count it, there isn't a single wastewater treatment plant. So all the sewage goes into the river and then is used in agriculture downriver. The quality of water is a big problem. The third is the soil is now becoming more salty, saline, because there's also seepage from the sea. And so we're working with farmers to help develop strains of crops that can cope with salinity and supporting them with other ways as well. So look at Ed in 1984 and Ed in 2024. So he's still working with Pakistani farmers 40 years later. And you can see young Ed and not so young Ed, but still in Pakistan. And I think this message is, you know, Australia, we're not just and I suppose in agriculture it's useful to say, it's not just a fair weather friend. We're here for a long time. Yeah. So I mean, I think it shows that we're here for the long haul. The other area I want to mention is water allocation. So Australia is working with the Ministry of Water Resources to use Australian software to help the Indus River System Authority, IRSA, allocate water to provinces. This is a very political matter in Australia. We fight between our provinces as who gets water. So we have some experience about how to manage this, but it's very political. But allocation of water is very important. Once you can measure water, you can cost it. So at the moment in Pakistan, you can't measure it because everyone takes it. In Australia, we're starting to measure water. And now farmers in Australia are trading water rights. So I have the right to X amount of water. I will sell you this right. Or I don't need it, so I will buy it from you. So we need to start costing water because there's not much of it. Another big problem is that the source of the water for Pakistan. So where does renewable water come from? Of course, you have the glaciers, which are melting, but 77%, over 3/4 of Pakistan's water originates outside your borders. When water is short, this is going to become an increasing challenge. Then how do you use your water as well? So farmers like, the experts like Ed say, in Pakistan, the policies now favor water intensive crops like sugarcane, like rice, like cotton. But actually, what should be favored are pulses, chickpeas, lentils, because this provides protein for the growing population. So there is some incentives that need to be looked at. Anyway, what we're doing essentially is working together to make Pakistani communities more resilient to the effects of climate change. But when we started 40 years ago, the researchers say we came and we were able to teach them a lot. They said now we're learning from Pakistani researchers as well. So it's a two-way, it's not just one way. And that's very important for us. So, part 3, Australia's strategic environment. So you can see we're a big piece of land in a large piece of water, and luckily we are just surrounded by water. Pakistan isn't so lucky. You have many land borders, and therefore, you know, it's more difficult. But our region at the moment is being reshaped, a bit like here, by increasing strategic competition between the US and between China. And how that rivalry is managed will affect us all, both in Australia and in Pakistan and in the whole of the region. So, what do we want in that region? So this is our foreign minister, Ms. Penny Wong, who again is also from, originally from Malaysia, as you can see, another one, and I was born in the UK, by the way. What does she say we want? So Australia, I quote, wants a region that is open, stable, and prosperous, a predictable region operating by agreed rules, standards, and laws, where no country dominates and no country is dominated, a region where sovereignty is respected and all countries benefit from a strategic equilibrium. And I will come back to that, a strategic equilibrium, end of quote. So it's important for both our countries, here in Pakistan and Australia, that this relationship between these two countries, US and China, is managed carefully and wisely to avoid surprises or miscalculation or a sudden deterioration. So that requires guardrails and dialogue. So Australia wants to work with our partners in the Indo-Pacific and Asia to manage this competition to achieve a strategic equilibrium in all our favor. However, we've also seen that this competition now is accompanied by an unprecedented conventional and non-conventional military buildup in our region, in a few countries, taking place without strategic reassurance and transparency. And that worries us. It also worries us that our alliance partner, the US, where I go back to that earlier one, is no longer a unipolar leader in the Indo-Pacific. So we're seeking a strategic balance in the Indo-Pacific, a balance where no state is militarily predominant and no state judged that the benefit of conflict might outweigh the risk. Conflict is in none of our interests. So the question is, how do we deter? In the past, Australia was far away from anywhere, and that remoteness was very helpful.